John Morgan here with Bob's Market and Greenhouses, and welcome to this week's episode of Bob's Live. And this week I have a little bit of a short episode. It's the middle of winter time. There's not a lot going on outside right now as far as gardening, but we do have quite a bit going on in the greenhouse. So before I get started, check out all of the new places that you can give us a follow and see the show weekly. So we have Rumble, Facebook, X, YouTube, and also, hopefully this week, we are also streaming on Instagram. So that is another streaming service that we've added. Um, Anyhow, let's go ahead and head out to the greenhouse and see what's happening out there. Today I'm out here in the greenhouse where we have some ferns that are on the move. So a few weeks ago, these were uptown, and now they're being hung pretty much everywhere where we have space to put them. Also, last week we were down at the field house looking at the first cuttings of the year. Well, some of those geranium cuttings that we were looking at have been transplanted into hanging baskets, and now they're here on the watering system where they'll hang for the next few months until they start to ship out. So this system, it acts kind of like a giant conveyor belt for the baskets. They come down through and then get watered right here as they pass by. And also it allows us to trim these baskets. So as the geraniums grow, they occasionally need to be trimmed, and that encourages them to branch out, so you get a nice fuller plant. But each one of these baskets has 3 plants in it, and well, this one you can actually see right there is a little glob of the water absorbing gel that we use in our soil. And in this bay of the greenhouse, we have begonia seedlings that are getting ready to ship out. But this is really one of the first crops to go in this section of this greenhouse this spring. Because previously, this section of the greenhouse, we didn't have heated, or well, we had the heat turned down, so that way we could save on energy costs. So every fall we put up this curtain down the middle of this greenhouse, and we only heat the back half of it. And that saves us a lot on our heating bill, because we don't need to heat this section if it's empty. But now with the ferns, the geraniums, and now seedlings starting to come into this section, we've ramped up the heating in here. And here pretty soon, probably in the next week or so, this curtain will come down. So another thing that we're doing in this greenhouse right now, which this is the driving range greenhouse, which is one of our older greenhouses here in behind the big red building at Mason. One of the things that we're doing is upgrading our heaters. So we're switching out some of the older heaters for newer units that are much more energy efficient. And that's a quick look at what's happening out here in the greenhouse. Alright, so that is a quick look at what's happening out in the greenhouse. And as I said, we've got a little bit of a short show for this week because I wanted to talk about something that I'm actually going to be talking about on the blog in a little bit more detail this Friday. So if you're not a subscriber to our blog, of course you can find it online at bobsmarket.com, but I recommend going there and subscribing, and that way you'll get each blog post in your email. And then we also send out like recipes. Um, we also do a monthly gardener's almanac. That's something that I kind of set aside over the summer while I had some stuff going on. Uh, I'm picking it back up, so you can expect a in detail almanac post coming out for February. January, I just kind of did a hey, the almanac is coming back sort of post because, again, it's the middle of winter time. Not a lot you can be doing as far as gardening goes, except tying it all back in here, except for planning. And I've talked a lot about garden planning in the past, but a lot of that has revolved around short term plans. And what I want to talk about this week on our blog and online is making long term garden plans. And I'm a planner, so I clean off my desk here a little bit, but I've got my daily journal right here. I buy a new book each year and I pretty well fill it up. This journal is 243 pages. But I keep a daily log of what I'm doing, write down my thoughts. Something I'll do is I allot 2 pages for each week, and I usually end up with about half a page empty. So I'll print off a couple pictures, tape them in, and that way I have kind of a conclusive or, sort of 10,000 foot view of what I was doing in a particular week. But I also use other pages for planning. And one of those is garden planning. So last year, let's see when I did this. Week 8, so just a couple weeks after right now last year, I sat down and made up a garden plan for my vegetable garden. And it might be kind of hard to see there, but there you go. So that's kind of the layout of my garden beds. And I kind of sketched out where I wanted stuff to go. So I had like my onion sets, greens, peas, all of that stuff that I could plant early on in March. So this very short-term plan, a springtime garden, it's March through May. But what I want to focus on is long-term plans. How do you come up with a vision for your garden over a 5, 10, 15, 20-year time period and then work toward that goal? Well, you do it by tacking together a bunch of short-term plans. So for my garden down at my house, I kind of want to go with a more natural looking garden. So I have a meadow style garden where it's really low maintenance. But the benefit of that is, well, it's low maintenance. But secondly, I can add to it slowly over the years, and it's not going to look bare or sparse. I just let some areas grow up naturally, and then I cultivate other areas. But you can do the same thing with any other type of landscape. It might be with trees creating structure in your garden. You have to plan on planting a smaller tree, unless you've got the budget for planting a full-size tree. But you have to plan on that tree growing over time and changing. But you can also plan on, well, in the future, I'm going to put a tree here. So I'm going to plan out my paths as if that tree were already there. So when it comes to setting up like your infrastructure and stuff like that in the garden, you need to really think ahead and then kind of plan backwards. And by doing that, most of us gardeners, we don't have unlimited budgets. HGTV,
they don't really do gardening at all anymore on HGTV. They just kind of cut the G out and it's just HTV. Uh, but back when they did more gardening shows, they would do like these, you know, home garden makeovers where to they would cram it into an hour long show, but it looked like they did it in a weekend. And really, usually that wasn't the time scale. And also, it wasn't the host and a couple other people that, had kind of leading roles in the show that were actually doing the work. I mean, they were doing the work, but they had a crew of 30 or 40 people in the background helping them. And most of us is just you out there in the garden or you and a loved one uh, taking care of your landscape. So, setting up the expectation of doing this huge transformation is kind of unrealistic from both a labor standpoint, a time standpoint, and the main thing is a budget standpoint. You can create a finished landscape in a short period of time, but it's going to be expensive. Um, I manage IT here at Bob's. A popular saying in IT is uh, fast, cheap, and good. You can have those three things. You can have it fast, you can have it cheap, and you can have it good, but you only get to pick two of those things. You can have fast and good, but it's not going to be cheap. You can have it fast and not great, and it'll probably be cheap. If you think about it, it makes sense. But the same thing kind of goes for gardening. You have to kind of break it up into stages and make it more manageable chunks. And that's what long term planning is all about. So, kind of create that vision off in the future of where you want your garden to be, and then slowly chip away at it. Maybe you have one big ticket item that you want to get done in 1 year. Like, oh, I'm going to add that water feature this year. I have that in the budget. So you get it done. And then next year it might be, oh, I'm going to build this pergola over here. Or I'm going to plant this many trees this year. And that's the way that I look at gardening. I pick one or two big things that I want to get done, and then I look at what can I grow from seed, because seed you usually get a lot more bang for your buck as far as coverage. If you're trying to plant a large area like my flower section, I can usually spend 50 or 60 bucks on seed and pretty much cover that whole area. And then in the front, I have flower beds where I plant traditional bedding plants. And I already know exactly how many flats it's going to take to fill that area in. So I know I need this many flats of impatiens, this many flats of coleus, and that's sort of my standard go-to in those areas. And I think a lot of us kind of have that, and that's a great thing to have. Um, but you kind of want to start building out things like perennials, trees, your infrastructure, and things like that. And that's where long term planning comes in. And yeah, I said this was going to be a short episode, and I'm starting to ramble here. So, if any of you have ideas about long term planning, and what are some things that you need to consider? We talked about budgeting, um, time management. Maintenance is a big thing. So you can add these things, but you also have to consider the time to maintain it. So if you're putting in say a white picket fence, that's something I want to eventually have around my vegetable garden. I have to plan in that every few years I'm going to have to repaint that fence. So that becomes a gardening task that you're adding in. So on the flip side, as I've said, I've got my meadow garden that's more low maintenance. So you kind of want to plan for both sides of the spectrum with maintenance. And, well, I guess that's all I've got. So if you have any ideas on tricks that you can use for long-term planning or things that you know that you ought to think about and consider, um, go ahead and bleep bloop type them down there in the comments, and I'll see them, and they might just make it into the blog post that I'm going to post this Friday. Okay, yeah. Patty says, yes, I would love to trash my lava rock in my front landscaping, but wow, that's a lot of work. And yeah, lava rock, I don't know what the deal was with lava rock like back in the 90s. Um, my parents had it around our swimming pool, and yeah, it's a pain to deal with because weeds grow up through it. It's hard to kill the weeds out of it, especially if it had weed cloth under it, which I think that's why I have such bad feelings about weed cloth now. Is partly dealing with that lava rock back then. Yeah, it just says it's just one big weed, and part of it is just you have to bite the bullet whether you hire somebody to come in and dig it up. That probably be a good job for like a high schooler looking for a summer job. Um, but whether you hire some help to do it or you just get in and just brute force it yourself. Down at my house, I have an area next to my sidewalk right in front of my house where the previous owner thought, not lava rock, they thought limestone would look good there. We'll just put down weed cloth and dump a bunch of limestone over top of it. And I'm like, why? So now I have this area, and I thought, oh, I'll just get rid of the limestone, pull up the weed cloth. So I started in a corner. Guess what? Underneath the limestone and the weed cloth is more limestone. So finally, what I've decided to do is I'm not even going to bother with plants in that area. I'm just going to put in some decorative river rock that will hide the limestone, and that's my long-term plan for there. But yeah, something like that, and tackling something like that, and if you're buying a house and you're not building yourself, sort of like what I did, you also have to tackle the previous owner's own landscaping. I don't think there's a single perennial in my landscape that is in its original location because I've dug up like hostas and things like that and transplanted them to different areas. This spring, or I need to check when's the best time to split hostas, whether it's spring or fall. I think I've done it both, I think. Um, but yeah, I need to go in and do that. So you'll probably see a video on that. But yeah, I've moved stuff around to kind of fit uh, my own tastes as far as landscaping goes. And a lot of that was just to make it lower maintenance. So instead of having a random hosta in an area where I'd have to weed eat and trim around it, I've put it in an area where it smothers out the weeds and eliminates weed eating. That way I can just kind of get right up against it with my riding mower and not have to worry about it. Because one thing that I hate to do is trimming. Yeah, it says her brother-in-law put it in the lava rock, so yeah. um, but yeah, long-term planning, it's it's an interesting thing because it kind of lets you set goals out in the future and then work toward those goals. And really, gardening, it's it's kind of a cliche to say it, but it is really more about the journey. It's about getting outside, enjoying nature, working up a sweat, and just working toward a goal. And with that, I'm going to say until next time, keep growing.